We are here. Welcome to the show, Tennis Talk Daily Live, and we're going to be talking about the U.S. Open draw, which was released today. Hello, Farzan. Hello, Sam. Hello, Cultura. We have the U.S. Open draw released. Finally. Disaster draw. Is that right? Well, I'm kind of doing an analysis on the fly here, to be honest. We can talk about this. We had a discussion yesterday that was interesting about Federer's racket. Apparently, he was bringing out a different kind of racket for practice, or a different color racket. Let's see if this is the stream going here. But I'm frozen on my live feed here. Are you guys seeing me live here? It's not. Come on. I'm not getting a monitor on this at all. Just see one thing. Oh, here it is. All right. We've got it. No sounds. In other words, none of that belching that was happening yesterday. I think that was something to do with the live stream, Farzan. I'm not quite sure what happened. In any case, I had kind of two things that I wanted to talk about. Hello, my friends. I missed you. It is an interesting draw. I've kind of done a preliminary analysis of it. I also want to talk about Federer's racket. Again, as I was saying, apparently he brought out that Black Beauty, which is a little different. I think it's called the Pro Staff Black, which was a little different from the Tuxedo, well, at least in color. The way they painted the frame of it, it's a little different. Well, well, let me back up. There was a little confusion, but Federer was playing with the Tuxedo Wilson, which is black and white. It's the Pro Staff Autograph, I think they call it. He didn't bring that out for the 2018 Australian Open, as far as I can tell. I mean, I checked pictures. I didn't check videos. I hadn't been examining it in that respect when it actually happened. But I think he had the Black Beauty in the Australian Open this year. I think he had the Black Beauty at Rotterdam. He had the Black Beauty at Indian Wells, and he had the Black Beauty at Miami. I have not seen any of Alan Clark's films. I don't think. Andrew Brooks, explain. Please explain. It was in Stuttgart. Don't you like how I pronounce that? Stuttgart. I used to speak a little German, so. Stutt. You can actually do it Stuttgart as well. But I think, yeah, Nadal versus Federer, sure. Right there in the opening round, or excuse me, Federer. Nadal versus Ferrer, yes, that will be an interesting match. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, Andrew, thanks. Yes, Stuttgart. Well, some people do it Stuttgart, but I like to just really emphasize that German Stuttgart. He brought out the Penguin, the Tuxedo Wilson at Stuttgart, and has been playing with it ever since. And then at practice the other day for the U.S. Open, he brought out the Black Beauty. So people were talking, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in terms of the evolution of Federer's rackets. There's a story. He's talked about it, and I want to talk about that somewhat. Why not? We were also talking yesterday about the extent to which Roger Federer has played the 250 level events. I did a little research on that as well, just kind of triggering my memory on this stuff, and we could talk a little bit about his 250 participation over the years. I think some people are saying Federer should retire. The Express UK did a story about this, and they were saying that basically people on Twitter, well, as they always do, they tried to make some clickbait out of it, said something to the effect of Rogers being urged to retire without disclosing who was urging him. Well, all the people that were urging Roger to retire were just random people on Twitter. All right, Connie, thanks. Yes, let's get into the draw. We can talk more about Rogers' racket later. I don't know why that's been on my mind, but we had an interesting conversation. So, listen, Nadal's at the top, Federer's at the bottom. Nadal here at the top of the draw does seem to have a pretty clean path into the final, to be honest. Certainly into the quarterfinals. No real problem. Nadal might have to deal with Edmund in the fourth round. That's about the biggest challenge he's going to have. There could be a match against Karen Khachanov, who just lost at the Winston-Salem Open. I predicted he might be in the final over there. I was dead wrong about that. But we could see Nadal face off against Khachanov, possibly even Ramos Vinolas. And that could be an interesting match. But again, I think the fourth round, and of course the opening round, as one of you just noted, Nadal versus David Ferrer, they're countrymen. That should be interesting. Obviously, David Ferrer he's kind of getting older, and he's lost his zest, as it were. He's lost he's certainly not at his peak anymore, but we'll see how that match looks. Could be interesting. But for Nadal, the contender coming at him in the round of four could cause a couple of problems, but I don't see too many problems for Rafa Nadal against Edmund. Then in the quarterfinals, who will Nadal face? Well, Ferrer has become a journeyman. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. And so in terms of the kind of dynamic in the quarterfinals, well, lower down in that quarter, you're going to have possibly Thiem facing off against Anderson in the fourth round. The winner of that match will go on and face, possibly Thiem versus Anderson. I'm kind of extrapolating into the fourth round here, but I do think that Anderson can probably take care of Thiem. Anderson is 6-1 against Thiem, and the only time Thiem has beaten Anderson was the last time they played, and it was on the dirt. Thiem is something of a dirt specialist, but he's never been beyond. Thiem is one of my guys. I like Dominic Thiem. I really wish he would do better. I'd love to see him do a lot better. Yeah, I want to talk about Wawrinka as well. Wawrinka's down at the bottom of the top half, and he's going to face off against Dimitrov in the opening round, which will be interesting. But didn't he take care of Dimitrov pretty recently? Remind me. But in any case, Thiem versus Anderson in the round of four, yeah, that's a real possibility. It could be Thiem versus Shapovalov. If Shapovalov can do something with Anderson in the third round. Could also be Bautista Agut versus Anderson if Bautista Agut can do something with Thiem in the third round. But it looks like the worst case scenario for Rafael Nadal in the quarterfinals will be Kevin Anderson. So Nadal versus Anderson quarterfinal, I'm not sure. I know Nadal leads in that head-to-head. Obviously, that would be a rematch from last year. In fact, a rematch from last year's final. I think he knows how to deal with Anderson. So that puts Rafa pretty comfortably into the semifinal stage, folks. Who might he have to deal with in the semifinal? Well, down in this second quarter of the top half, you've got Del Potro, you've got Tsitsipas, you've got Isner, you've got Coric, you've got Raonic, you've got Wawrinka, and you have Dimitrov. So in terms of fourth round, I'm looking at probably a Delpo versus Coric And I hope it's Tsitsipas, to be honest. I hope it's Delpo versus Tsitsipas, and I think Stefanos could could absolutely uh, take care of Juan Martin. Certainly capable of doing it. It just all depends on the kind of day he's having. But Delpo performs well at the U.S. Open. So if I had to reach into my pocket and bet my hard-earned dollars, I would say that the quarterfinal will probably include Del Potro. And in terms of who he'll be playing, well, in the other fourth round match that'll determine who Del Potro would play, it probably would be Isner versus either Raonic, Dimitrov, or Wawrinka. That's kind of wide open down there in that sort of bottom eighth of the top half. Man, that's interesting. You got Raonic, Wawrinka, Dimitrov, Isner. So that's kind of an open question. Hard to call. I would love to see Stan power through and then face Isner, do a job on Isner, and then we could see a Delpo versus Stan in the quarterfinal. Well, that will tee up a potential semifinal between Nadal and probably Del Potro. But possibly if Wawrinka can push through, it could be interesting. And I do think, based on the looks of this draw, folks, I think Rafa Nadal has a very solid chance of, slipping into this final. I think he's probably going to be there. I can't even imagine any of these players really upsetting. I think Anderson's probably capable of doing it. Certainly Delpo's capable, Wawrinka probably capable, but those are, I think, sort of outside bets. I don't think that's something you want to reach into your pocket and bet on necessarily. So that would be my soft prediction at the outset based on the top half. It would be Nadal versus, I want to say either Del Potro. Gosh. In my heart of hearts, I'm hoping for Tsitsipas, so it'd be Nadal versus probably Del Potro, possibly Tsitsipas, possibly Wawrinka. I doubt Raonic or Dimitrov will be able to squeeze through, but you never know. Raonic might be there too. But in any case, I think Rafa's got a clean path into the final. Who will he meet in the final? Kane, let's stop and look at a couple of comments. Kane, the sentiment here is that Novak will win the U.S. Open. No? Well, my sentiment, in fact, is that Nadal has probably a slight edge based on a few factors. One, he's the defending champion. He's been playing just tremendously this season, almost better than last year in a way. He is going to be rested up to a greater degree than a lot of the other players. So, listen, it's, if they're going to meet, it's going to be Nadal versus Djokovic in the final, which is where they should be meeting in a way. But let's look at the bottom half to see how things could shake out. I think Novak's looking pretty good. You have Cilic, who will have to probably deal with like Manarino, possibly Tiafoe in some earlier rounds. And he might have to deal with Pablo Cuevas, who's no slouch. That would be in the second round. But I do think, and I'm hoping, you're going to see Goffin face off against Cilic in the fourth round. I think that's a very probable round of 16 match, Cilic versus Goffin. And for those of you who haven't been tuning into my live streams, Goffin is my new favorite player with a two-hander. I mean, the guy's just beautiful to watch. And check out some of those highlights from Cincinnati. I mean, when he is on and doing well, and I hope he feels good. I hope his injury is resolving. Remember, he was the top seed over at Winston-Salem this week, and he withdrew from the tournament. Of course, he retired from the match against Roger in Cincy. Well, again, I hope Goffin is very fresh. I hope he's fresh enough to do a job on Marin Cilic. But Marin Cilic has won the U.S. Open before. Been a while, and he's doesn't tend to perform up to that level that he was performing at in, I believe it was 2014. But I would love to see. This will be a great match, Cilic versus Goffin. So that's one of the round of 16 matches in the bottom half. You could also, the next fourth round match, which will determine that quarterfinal, would be either Nishikori. I'm thinking it's going to be Nishikori versus Zverev. You do have Krajinovic in there too, but again, I don't think he's going to be able to push through. I think it's going to be Nishikori versus Alexander Zverev in that round of 16, or that's one possible result. Unless Diego Schwartzman can send Nishikori packing, but you know what? Nishikori looks pretty strong these days. I think he does. I think he's looking more and more consistent. In a way, his comeback has kind of tracked Stan Wawrinka's. He's kind of just getting into the flow. It's taken a little longer for Wawrinka to get into a rhythm, or as Roger would say, rhythm. Rhythm. Roger says rhythm like a Rasta man, which reminds me that I haven't gotten my Rasta wig out in a while. One of these days I got to get my Rasta wig out. Well, if Cilic plays Goffin in the round of 16 at the U.S. Open, I'm getting my wig out for no particular reason at all. So that quarterfinal in that quarter in the top part of the bottom part of the draw, kind of a windy way to say that, but could look something like Goffin versus Zverev or Cilic versus Nishikori. I mean, if I had to make the soft prediction, which is kind of based on hope in a way, I hope Goffin is performing. I really do. I want to see him go deep in this tournament. What's his record at the U.S. Open? Let's just check here. Can't remember in previous. I don't think he's had a tremendously deep run. I'm going to Wikipedia, which is actually not a great source for this sometimes. They screw this up. Okay, he had a fourth round run last year. I knew that, but in terms of years prior, I'm not sure whether he's been farther than the fourth round. So maybe that's a risky prediction to predict Goffin into the quarterfinals, particularly when you have Cilic. Let me say, too, that Cilic looked splendid in Cincinnati. And listen, Djokovic was able to take care of him for sure, but Cilic was playing very well. I mean, particularly with his ground strokes, basically the ground game coming from Cilic. I mean, you look at the ground game from Cilic, you look at the ground game from Raonic in Cincinnati, they were just smacking the ball, placing shots in very precise ways, and they weren't taking any of the sort of pushing malarkey from Djokovic. As I was saying yesterday, to clarify my last claims about Djokovic in the final of Cincy, and it has nothing to do with something immutable about his play. It's just the way he played in that match, the way that he needed to play, the sufficient way of playing that match against a lackluster Roger Federer was to basically, get the ball back and play. He's capable of doing more. We'll see more from him. He's capable of doing a lot more. Federer just didn't require it of him. So then we get to the bottom quarter, which is the one where we're going to have Federer and Djokovic, a possible Federer-Djokovic quarterfinal. So Federer now only a week, well, it'll be a couple of weeks by this time, but only a couple of weeks after suffering what I think was a humiliating defeat in a way to Djokovic in Cincinnati, will have a chance to redeem against Novak Djokovic. Now, I don't know the precise numbers of Federer and Djokovic at the U.S. Open. I think Djokovic has been able to outdo Federer quite often in New York, and I think that it'll be a close match. I would love to see the match, the correct match, for lack of a better term, the correct match between Djokovic and Federer, which is a match in which both of them are playing up to their true abilities, and particularly Federer. And I think if both of them are playing up to their true abilities, then it could be a close match. Djokovic is in no way a foregone conclusion that Djokovic will be able to push through Federer into the quarterfinals. So Federer is as big of a problem for Djokovic as Djokovic is for Federer in this U.S. Open, folks. I mean, I said the other day I didn't pick Federer as a favorite for the U.S. Open. I mean, he's one of a group of people that you could put in a basket and call favorites. You never want to count Roger Federer out. Hi, Robert. How you doing, buddy? Nice to see you. You never want to count Roger Federer out. No. And I said yesterday, by the way, and it kind of bears repeating, he's coming into this U.S. Open with a completely different context and mindset, and possibly even tennis racket. Actually, I take that back. No, we'll talk about that in a little bit, LSB. He's coming in with a completely different mindset. Last year, coming into the U.S. Open, I think he was pretty much the favorite, I think. And so there was a lot of pressure on him right from the get-go. And, man, he was struggling really right from the first round, as I recall, in last year's U.S. Open. Of course, he fell to Del Potro ultimately, but it wasn't as devastating of a loss to Delpo as the one that took place in Indian Wells. Some people believe, a couple people over on Twitter believe that the Indian Wells loss was the trauma that has created all the problems for Roger Federer. It was a traumatic match. And I'm voicing other people's opinions. I think it was a significant match. I did a video, I think I called it The Last Sighting of Roger Federer. It was after Miami. And I talked about the Chung match, Federer versus Chung in Indian Wells. And I think in the Chung match, he was kind of still there. He was still present. But I think that after Chung, it got rough. He got into a funk, and not that great Fed funk, like that funky stuff. No, a funk meaning he got into this strange state. Well, Robert Ferguson, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, my friend. That's helpful for someone who, has a couple of kids. Anyway, no, I appreciate that, buddy. The context is different. Now he has no pressure. The pressure's off of Roger Federer, isn't it? You got people on Twitter telling him to retire. You have people basically concluding, I think there's a consensus here, that Roger Federer is just he's not at all the favorite here. I mean, we can't count on him at this point. There's just too much of a pattern, even for Fed fans. And I had a message about this. You're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't on this tennis channel sometimes. But I had a friend a viewer, I consider him a friend, saying I was way too hard on Roger Federer, that we would never want to count him out. Well, listen, I'm not counting Roger Federer out. I'm just saying, if we're going to make picks, if we're going to select a couple of individuals that are most likely to win, I'm not sure Federer is going to be in the top 3 people that I choose. I mean, let me know if you disagree, but I just think that's an inevitable conclusion. It's just unavoidable. It's just too much of a pattern. But the fact that he has no pressure, there's no pressure. No one expects Roger to win at all. Of course, when he gets out onto the court, we're all going to be watching, and maybe we'll start to generate some expectations. Maybe his fans, the people that adore him, will start to have expectations. But he won't be feeling that very intense weight of the pressure. So that's good. A lot of people have been saying on Twitter, we need Roger to relax. He needs to relax. He looks a little uptight. I had an interesting thought the other day, and I think I still need to kind of work through it. I'm not prepared to sort of commit myself to it, but one thought I was having is that Federer, in a way, he looks so good. He's got that outfit. He had that black outfit on. It's all fitted, and he's just such a beautiful player. And the thought I had, and I haven't really developed this yet, is that maybe he's a little too concerned. Maybe this reputation he has for being graceful and beautiful and so handsome and well fitted out there in the court, maybe that constrains him in ways too. Because you know what? I don't think Novak Djokovic cares what he looks like. He just wants to win. Rafael Nadal, kind of going a little bald there in the back. And I remember at the end of the Rogers Cup, I mean, it was great for Rafa to win the Rogers Cup. But you know what? He didn't really look great at the end of the Rogers Cup. I mean, they're both kind of showing their age, Federer and Nadal. I mean, Djokovic not so much. But, Djokovic is not worried about looking good. He's not worried about the photographers. He's not worried about how his outfit is fitting as much, maybe. Nor is Nadal. So maybe it's kind of expectations, but I do think this expectation, he looks so good. Everything is it's so perfect and beautiful. Now, few of you are going to comment and say to me, oh, we don't want to hear about your love for Roger Federer. But yes, Robert, good point. You've got the new contract. Now there is some pressure there. I assume we can surmise that there's some pressure there. On the other hand, it's not a huge brand, and I do think that Roger maybe even is doing them a favor by signing with them, because that is really going to elevate the name of that brand. So I don't know, maybe there is some pressure there. It's possible. Let's just check out some comments. But I guess the main point about this is that there's no pressure, or virtually relatively little pressure on Federer, one. And two, he has been losing. He has a desire to redeem himself. There's no pressure, but he has a desire to prove himself. It was such a disappointing performance for Federer at the end of the day in Cincinnati that I think he wants to, maybe, I don't know, he could surprise us a little bit. So let's just see what happens with Federer. Those are two contextual factors. There's really no pressure. On the other hand, he's got something to prove. He's got some fire in his belly, potentially. I don't know that for sure. I hope he does. But it's potentially some fire in his belly that he didn't have coming in to the U.S. Open last year, having won Wimbledon and the Australian Open and the Sunshine Double. I mean, he was all confidence, a lot of expectations, but less desire, less motivation to win, possibly, and a little tired, possibly a little injured too, because remember at the Rogers Cup, he lost his Zverev, and there were some back issues. As I recall, they didn't really materialize and turn into anything very serious, but there were those lingering issues. So no injury issues here, no lingering injury issues. So listen, Federer has some potential problems on his hands right at the outset. Remember the bearded racket smasher, Benoit Paire, or as some people, and Roger pronounces Benoit Paire's name incorrectly. If you go to the ATP site, Benoit Paire pronounces his own name. And he pronounces it Benoit. That's what Roger does, Benoit, which sounds really cool. But I do think that it's wrong. I know that it's wrong because I've heard Benoit Paire pronounce his own name. But Benoit is an emotional guy. He can have outbursts on the court, but he's also a very solid player. So Federer could have some competition on his hands right there in the second round. Let me take a couple of comments here. Robert Ferguson says maybe more topspin to bring down the unforced errors, at least during a spate of a match to build confidence. Yeah, that's true. Well, okay, now LSB. We've had this discussion before, and I think what you said is that Benoit Paire actually says Benoit. Well, for those of you who have access to the internet, go to his ATP page. I invite you to listen to the way he pronounces his name. I'm hearing it as Benoit. I don't hear a Benoit. I don't hear a Benoit, at least not in an exaggerated way. But yeah, Benoit. No, I'm sorry. Paire is a solid guy. That's right. He's a solid guy. You're saying culture and sport. I never said he was not a solid guy. He does have emotional outbursts. He's smashing rackets at Halle, or was that in Stuttgart? I forget. And then he had some breakdown recently on the court. He's a very effective player, and he gave Federer some problems on the turf. But he does have an emotional problem in terms of emotional control in a way. I'm not sure it's hurting him. I can't really verify that. I mean, with some people, the emotional outbursts kind of help them generate the force of will that they need to do what they need to do. So the most recent example is Djokovic versus Raonic. Djokovic smashed his racket very intensely, embarrassed himself in a very big way against Raonic, but then went on to win the match, or the set. He was broken in the first set. He went on to win the first set. So the racket smashing for Djokovic seemed to do him quite well. It got him sort of pissed off, and he performed as a result. Djokovic is good at doing that. I was saying yesterday that at this point in time, we could kind of distinguish between Nadal and Djokovic on the one hand and Federer on the other, if we're talking about big three players. And Djokovic and Nadal are distinct and unique players insofar as they can turn it around. If you break Rafael Nadal as a player on the other side of the court, if you break Rafael Nadal, you're in trouble. You're going to get broken back. If you break Novak Djokovic, you're in trouble. You're going to get broken back. I mean, that's the difference. With Roger, you're not so much in trouble. Not these days. You can break Roger Federer and come back and feel pretty confident you're going to hold your own serve. That's just based on the empirical evidence that I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of stats on that. But I do believe that Rafa and Djokovic are mind-blowingly good at just through force of will turning their game around and saying to themselves, listen, I was broken. I need to break back. It's going to happen. Let's do this. And they do it. And it really is impressive. And that is kind of what Roger's lacking, that force of will. I called it the diamond, when kind of just push through and become that player. I mean, one of the last times I saw it was in the last set against Cilic at the Australian Open in the final, last set against Cilic in the 2018 Aussie Open. He kind of brought out that he just went into turbo mode, call it God mode. I don't know what we want to call it, but John ST says, I think overall the level of the big three has gone down. They're still in finals and semis of the big tournaments, however. That's true. They're still doing good. I'm not sure about that. I mean, we'll have to see what Djokovic is capable of doing. I mean, listen, Rafael Nadal is the defending French Open champion, defending U.S. Open champion. Nadal has not won 3 Grand Slams in a year very many times. I think he's done that a couple of times, and it's been a long time. So 2 Grand Slams in a year for Nadal is quite good. He's done worse than that. Djokovic, we're just going to have to see. Yeah, I've been talking about the draw, Robert. You're talking about lot 3 through 7. Look at 3 through 7. Well, in any case, let me know if you have a question about the draw. But what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at here is very possibly a Federer versus Djokovic quarterfinal. That's when it's going to happen, if at all. But Chung is someone who could give Federer problems before the quarterfinal. Oh, and I forgot to mention this. Third round potential matchup against Nick Kyrgios, between Roger Federer and Nick Kyrgios. So that's going to be possibly in the third round. Now, Kyrgios, I don't think has had a run beyond the third round at the U.S. Open. So he's not great at this tournament, but he has given Federer problems before. So the more I'm looking at this draw, the more I'm beginning to conclude that, I see what you mean with respect to the seeds, Robert. Yeah. The more I think about it, the more I am left to conclude that Federer has a tough draw. It may be the toughest draw of the top seeds. Certainly Djokovic doesn't have much. I mean, Djokovic doesn't have to deal with someone like Nick Kyrgios in the third round. He'll have to deal with maybe Carreño Busta, possibly Luca Pouille. But those aren't big guns like a potential Nick Kyrgios match. So, and then of course Rafa Nadal. I mean, Cilic, does have the round of 4 possibility against Goffin, but I think Roger's draw is actually looking probably more difficult than any of the top seeds as I'm looking at it. Again, potentially Benoit pair or Benoit pair. We can split the difference, split the baby, as it were. And that could be a tough match. Then you're going to have possibly Kyrgios in the third round. Then you're going to have possibly Chung or Fognini in the fourth round, which is not too bad. Not too bad. Chung is capable of doing a little damage. We'll have to see. And then if he can get through that, then, of course, he might have to deal with Djokovic. And all of this is before the semifinals. So, wow. It's a pretty tough one for Federer, guys. That's my conclusion on this. If he can get through Djokovic, he's still going to have to deal with the likes of probably Cilic, potentially Goffin in the semifinal, and then, of course, in order to claim his 6th crown, which, again, I believe is unlikely. I believe it's unlikely for a number of reasons. I mean, the first reason is he hasn't won it in an incredibly long time. On the hard courts, I think he likes the faster surfaces, so the Aussie Open is much better for him in terms of a potential Grand Slam title in the future for him, which could very well happen, although Djokovic, when he's in form, is pretty much the king of the Australian Open with Federer in a way. They're kind of both kings over there. I think they both have the record for 6 trophies, but it will be an uphill battle, folks. But if you imagine the scenario of Federer getting through and winning this, wow, that would do an incredible amount for his legacy. It would be amazing. Why? Because he'll likely have to beat Djokovic to get there. And then he will have to beat Nadal. It's going to be perfect. He'll have to beat, if you could come through Djokovic and come through Nadal and lift this trophy, it would do wonders for his legacy. Not that he doesn't need anything more. He's still basically the GOAT right now, guys, as time passes, it's going to become more likely that just by virtue of those French Open titles alone that Rafa could catch him. But on the other hand, you also have Djokovic. Djokovic is not going anywhere. Djokovic is here, and he has shown himself capable of basically just winning all the Grand Slams consecutively and just kind of blow the roof off the place. So if he continues to do that, I mean, if Djokovic can pick up a couple of Grand Slam trophies each year for the next few years, he's going to be starting to get close to Roger's hind end as well. So we'll have to see about all of that. Yeah, Cilic is always dangerous, Levy. Did you watch him at Cincinnati in the match? I think it was the match against Djokovic. I mean, he was, from the ground, he looked really good on the ground. Again, wasn't taking any of the kind of pushing approach from Djokovic at all. And when Djokovic doesn't have to, when the player on the other side of the court doesn't permit Djokovic to recline into essentially pushing, he can do a lot more. So I'm for you Djokovic fans out there, I'm totally with you on that. I've told you that my claims about Djokovic were limited to Cincinnati. And for those of you who think I don't like Djokovic also, you need to go back to my Wimbledon championship video. This guy's amazing, man. I admire Novak Djokovic tremendously. I've studied the stats on Djokovic, and the more you study the stats on Djokovic, the more you understand that he is a force of nature, a force to be reckoned with, one of the greats, and he's not done. The fact that he came from he went from the top to the depths. I talked about this a little yesterday. He went from the top when he did that, the 4 consecutive Grand Slams in a 12-month period, and then to the bottom. He just went into the depths, and he just sucked. And it took him so long, but now he's climbed his way out of the hole. It's so commendable. And now he's the Wimbledon champion. He wins in Cincinnati. He's one of the mentionable favorites for the U.S. Open. Verifiable. He is verifiably a favorite for the U.S. Open in a way that Roger Federer is not. But for the Fed fans, it's a perfect tournament. Federer fans shouldn't want Federer to have an easy draw. We want him to have a killer draw, a vicious draw. We want him to come up against all the competition that gives him, rubs him the wrong way. We want him to outdo the real competition. That's Djokovic, that's Nadal. This tournament is set up for Federer to meet Djokovic and Nadal. So if Federer can push through, if Federer can beat Kyrgios, and then come through Chung possibly in the round of 4, possibly Fognini, that won't be a big deal. The third round against Kyrgios really presents more of an issue for Federer. But, because again, Kyrgios just knows how to get under Federer's skin a bit. Not as well as Djokovic, but knows how to get under Federer's skin. So, of course, Federer has done very well against Rafa Nadal in the last 5 meetings. They've been on the hard courts, and we're on hard courts now. Nadal and Federer have never met in the final. But listen, if Federer can come through Djokovic, and I think Federer can come through Djokovic, why not? He's capable of doing it. He knows what he did wrong. He's going to examine that experience, and he's going to modify his game. He's going to change things. He's going to identify what happened. I think he was again, I said it was a bad day at the office, but possibly something to do with his age. There's a confluence of factors that are creating the Roger Federer that we have today that is not the Roger Federer that we necessarily had a year ago. He's kind of a different player. He's a year older. He's in a different psychological state right now. But I think he can come through Djokovic. I think the circumstances are right for him to come through Djokovic in a way in this quarterfinal. Why? Because he just lost to Djokovic. He really wants to win. He wants to beat Djokovic, guys. And I mean, it's serious because that was traumatic too. If there were two matches, actually, the traumas for Roger are starting to accumulate. I think if I had to identify three matches that have been most traumatic for Roger Federer and that have most influenced the player he is today, first of all, that Del Potro match at Indian Wells. Man, that was crazy. That was just a nightmare. But you'd have to put the Anderson match at Wimbledon. Oh my God, that was almost must have been equally traumatic. And then Djokovic. I think those are the three matches. Del Potro, Anderson, and Djokovic. Those are the three sore spots for Roger Federer this year. And he didn't care about Anderson too much. He came off the court in the match with Anderson. He said, I was playing well out there, which is a strange thing to say. He was playing well, and it's just mind-blowing that ultimately he could not pull through that. 2 sets. It was 2-0 for Roger Federer. In a way, you just got to give credit to the South African there. That was nuts. That was absolutely nuts. I didn't know how to just process that. Federer 2 sets up and then he loses the match. Oh my God. So those are the traumas. So Roger has traumas. One of the traumas relates to Djokovic. He likes to heal his traumas. The best way to heal a trauma, take revenge. Take revenge against the person who's traumatized you. Well, I think Federer can push through Djokovic at the U.S. Open. And the best of 5, hey, that might even benefit Federer in a way. Juan Ruiz, Anderson, the real most valuable player. Yeah, Anderson deserves a lot of credit after that Wimbledon match. And he is a finalist from last year at the U.S. Open. We cannot count Anderson out. But the problem is that Anderson will have to deal with the great Rafael Nadal before he can even get into the semifinals this year. So it's not really looking too great for Anderson. But listen, he's capable of doing pretty much anything. After that match with Federer, I think Anderson's capable of doing pretty much anything. He can beat any player. After he did that 2 sets down to Roger Federer, and then he comes back and wins. That astounding. So that guy's got some grit. He is a scrappy player. He will not give up. You will not kill Kevin Anderson's spirit very easily. Devastating him in a set, taking 2 sets off him, doesn't matter. He does not go gently. He will fight and fight and fight some more. Well, listen, I don't put it past him. He could take care of Nadal too. So let's say Anderson beats Nadal in the quarterfinal. That could happen. Then what would be looking like in the semifinals? Well, that could be, again, a Delpo versus Anderson. You might see a Wawrinka versus Anderson in the semifinal. I'm really hoping to see. It's still hard to comprehend, Eric. Yes, it is very hard to comprehend. In terms of the speed of the courts, it's a good question. But here's just kind of a rough picture of what's happening. These courts are a little faster than Indian Wells. Indian Wells is notoriously slow for the hard courts. The U.S. Open courts are a little faster. Thank you, Armand. Yeah, the podcast all by yourself. It is a little hard. It's not that hard. I love talking so much. What's hard is this chair, which is hard on my ass. Sorry, I think I can swear. I think we're all adults here. What's really hard is this chair, which is hard on my ass, and my ass is starting to hurt. These live streams, they tend to go on. I just love talking with you guys. But I'm going to have to give my butt a rest here pretty soon. But that is possible. I really would like to see Wawrinka. What do you guys think about Stan? Oh, look at this. I like your style, Sarthak. Nice. Tsitsipas will win the U.S. Open in 2018. Now, that would blow the roof off the sucker. That would blow the roof off the sucker. Yeah, thanks. That's a good... It's a good idea, LSB, except those are kind of, they're kind of big and bulky. Maybe I'll get this blanket. Oh, I've got my baby daughter's pillow. I probably won't want to let her know that I'm sitting on the pillow that she uses for her face. Anyway. Well, that is much more comfortable. Thanks for that suggestion. Yes, Stan looks great, man. In the match with Federer, it was the old Stan. Stan was back. That match showed a lot of promise for Federer, too. I talked so much about how he seemed to turn it on in that final set against Wawrinka in Cincy. It was like old times. It was the diamond, because Stan's level of play did not fall. Stan was playing fantastically in that match. Remember, he took the first set in a tiebreak. He couldn't get into Roger Federer's serve. And then the next day, or not the next day, it was a couple days later, Roger goes out there with Djokovic, and in the first game, I knew something was awry in that final when in the first game Djokovic was able to produce 3 break points on the Federer serve, and that game was the 98th straight service hold for Federer in Cincinnati, but Djokovic was knocking on the door. He knocked 3 times. Listen, Armand, go to the ATP site and listen to Stan pronounce his own name. And listen to him pronounce his own name, too. Excuse me. Listen to him pronounce his own name. There's no V's in it, as far as I can hear. Well, I have a little thing going, a little running argument here with LSB about how Benoit Paire's name is pronounced, and it's come down to differing interpretations of what he's saying. When I hear Benoit Paire in his ATP page, I hear Benoit Paire. Apparently, LSB hears Benoit Paire. But in any case, when I hear Stan Wawrinka pronounce his name, it's Wawrinka. It's Wawrinka. There's no V's. It's not Wawrinka. Now, I was told, in fact, by one of you, I love you guys a lot, but sometimes a few of you will mislead me. SM, go to the ATP page. Well, you're saying it's Benoit. It's not Benoit, it's Benoit. So is that the distinction, SM? It wouldn't be Benoit, because the way you're spelling it, it's more like Benoit. So I think it's like Benoit. Rather than Benoit, it's Benoit. So I think that's the compromise. Now, Benoit would be so happy to know that we're talking about him here live on YouTube. The bearded racket smasher. I actually love Benoit Paire. And he's a great player, but he is a racket smasher, and he does have problems with emotional control. In any case, Wawrinka, I think, is Wawrinka. Go to the ATP page right now. Just Google Stan Wawrinka in Google and go there. It has the little icon where you can listen to the name. He says Wawrinka. So there's no V's on that. But what I was going to say is, although I love you guys a lot, there have been times when one or two of you have set me down the wrong path on pronunciations before. I've trusted you, and in fact, I have a number of episodes on Tennis Talk Daily where I pronounce Stan's name incorrectly with the V's. I used to pronounce it Wawrinka, and I like that too. Wawrinka, Stanislav Wawrinka. That sounds really good, but apparently it's not the right way to do it. Again, you listen to him pronounce his own name, and he's got kind of a weird voice, kind of a high voice. So it's again, it's hard to kind of trace the syllable, the pronunciation and the syllables. But I do think. Can I pronounce Bjorn Borg? Well, am I doing that wrong? Bjorn. Or maybe it's the rolling R. Bjorn. That's the one that I have a problem with. You got to roll the R's, for example, with Coric. His first name is Borna Coric. It's not Borna, it's Borna Coric. Borna Coric. Yes, Borg. Yeah, well, it could be pronounced that way. Is that right? Well, here's the thing with the tennis players' names. They don't correct. In Cincinnati, who was it? There was a number of times in Cincinnati when they were mispronouncing names. I'd have to look at the draw, but oh yeah, Marton Fucsovics. Now, one of you actually told me, and I have not went to verify this on the ATP site, but one of you told me a long time ago that it was Fucsovics, Marton Fucsovics. Well, the announcers at Cincinnati were saying, and a couple of other tournaments in the recent past, they pronounce it Fuskovics, which is totally wrong. It's not. I don't think it's close, but I have to actually go verify that on the site. Anyway, the other thing that I was going to mention is that I don't know if you guys heard. Well, a number of people yesterday were telling me that Federer was out on the court at the U.S. Open practicing with a different racket. So, my thumbnail for this live stream queried whether Federer has a new racket. And LSB was very kind to send me a message with some of the background information on Federer's rackets. And there's a quote in particular from Federer. I think the interview was in March 2018, excuse me. So he'd already won the Australian Open. He says he just feels like there's three frames. There's the 85 square inch, the 90, and the 97. He says, this is Roger Federer speaking, I had the 85 square inch to 2002, so that was before Roger Federer was even a name. Then he changed to the 90 in 2002, and that actually coincided with, or roughly coincided, remember he beat Sampras in the fourth round at Wimbledon in 2001, but he really had the breakthrough. Then 2002 wasn't a tremendous year for him. He didn't have, he had a couple of results, but not many Grand Slam results. And then, of course, 2003 was when he really broke through. So that racket change to the 90 square inch head does coincide basically with Federer's first breakthrough. So then he used the 90 inch all the way up to 2014, and this is coming out of the horse's mouth. Then he uses the 90. Then he started using the 97 inch. Well, according to the nuance added by LSB, as I understand it, he was playing around. He wasn't using the 97 all the time, and he was still kind of playing around with some different variations. But what he says in 2018, in March 2018, is that he changed his racket to 97 square inch in 2014, and he's still using it. He's still with a 97 incher, as far as I know. It took him a long time to catch up. He might have won Hamburg in 2002. I'm not sure, But yeah, Patrick, I trust Patrick. He seems to be good with the numbers. Thanks for confirming that. But he was slow to come on. He was slow to adjust to the changing technology. Of course, Rafa has always had the really big head. He's got, I believe, 100 square inch head on his racket. Djokovic, it's hard to tell with Djokovic. It's really hard to confirm. You got to make a few distinctions. I mean, the first distinction is there is not the rackets that they actually use are not necessarily the rackets that they endorse. Like if you type into Google, Roger Federer's racket, it's going to come up with, the Wilson Pro Staff, either black or autograph. But the ones you can buy, I mean, not necessarily the same ones that Roger is using. And then, of course, there's the different paint jobs. And one of the observations made by folks watching Roger practice in the U.S. Open was that he came out with a racket that had a different paint job on it. It's basically the Black Beauty that he was using for a long time, right up until Stuttgart. Now, LSB, I think we have a difference here. Go back and look at the highlights from the Australian Open in 2018. He was using the Black Beauty. It was not the Tuxedo. The Tuxedo came into play, or the Penguin, whatever you want to call it, that came into play at Stuttgart. It was Stuttgart, Halle, and Wimbledon, and then Cincinnati, and now potentially it's gone, although he may come out onto the match courts at the U.S. Open with the Tuxedo. Sorry, maybe we were trying to have that discussion. But in any case, a paint job is one thing. I'm not sure there's any difference between that Black Beauty that he uses and the Tuxedo. And they're both 97 square inches. Now, with respect to all the little tweaks and modifications and string tensions, string composition, he likes to use the natural gut strings, I'm pretty sure. Federer generally prefers, or at least has had to deal with the factors of control and feel. He likes control and feel as opposed to the pure power. You sacrifice some control with the larger heads. And Rafa, Nadal can do it. He puts the insane amount of topspin on the ball, and the bigger head can help him do that as well, but he can keep it under control with the tremendous topspin. But generally, it's the principle, and you can try this. You can go out and try rackets, and you can feel it, particularly when there's 3 or 4 inches of a disparity. You can feel it. 1 or 2 inches actually is not much. I can't really feel 1 or 2 square inches. Maybe the professionals can. But when you're talking about a difference between, say, a 95-inch square inch racket and Rafa's 100 square inch racket, there's a real difference there, and there's a lot more power. Djokovic, I think he's at a 98, but again, I don't think he discloses. I mean, no one's measuring these rackets, the actual rackets. Again, they have rackets that they endorse, and those rackets cannot be equated with the rackets that they're actually using, which are most likely customized in a variety of ways, in various and sundry ways, including string tension, etc. But Federer was late in terms of enlarging his racket head, and a lot of people do say it had something to do with his comeback at the Australian Open. The idea, so then there's a claim out there. Excuse me. There's a claim out there, and again, yeah, I agree, Robert. How do you bring down the unforced errors? Well, I think you have a point about the topspin. One of the factors that I don't think we've talked a lot about in on this channel, but we do have the issue of grips. Of course, Federer uses a modified Eastern forehand grip. Now, that's not the topspin special grip. The Westerns and the semi-Westerns are the topspin specials. Those are what, Nadal, Djokovic, Wawrinka, Kyrgios, Nishikori uses. And then with the Eastern forehand variations, you have Federer, Delpo, Dimitrov. But in terms of the numbers, in terms of how much topspin, Federer is able to get almost as much topspin on his forehands with his Eastern grip as Nadal can get with his, I believe it's a semi-Western, and he might even twist it even more. Of course, the Western grip puts a lot of strain on the wrist and the elbows. It's a lot of fun to hit with. I think in my own experience, I just kind of gravitated more toward the Western. But the other thing to notice about these grips and to observe about these grips is that they're constantly changing them too. You see how much Federer's spinning around that racket during the course of points? There's a number of players that do that. They change their grips. Certainly some of the volleys are hit in a different way with a different grip for Federer. And I think he might even recline back into like a continental sort of thing for some volleying, forehand volleys potentially. I don't think he's gripping the thing. He could probably do forehand volleys with an Eastern. You have more problems with a Western grip with forehand volleys. But in terms of the racket, there are people who believe, just based on the fact that he played so devastatingly well at the 2017 Australian Open, that Federer changed his racket. It must have been a racket change coming in to the 2017 Australian Open, different from what he was using before, prior to his injury and whatnot. But again, according to what Federer says, there was no change in the racket head size. It was a 97 square incher since about 2014. And so I'm not sure what else could have changed. They're always tweaking string tension and other string composition. They're tweaking those things at regular intervals, so that could have made something of a difference. But I don't see that the claim that Roger Federer brought in a whole new racket to the 2017 Australian Open, I don't see that claim as supportable. I don't know where the evidence is. It's not. I'm reading Roger Federer's interview. He says he's been using the same racket in terms of the racket head since 2014. So I won't talk too much more about this racket head thing. It was kind of people were buzzing about it over on Twitter. I don't think it's a big deal. Again, he was using the Tuxedo, which is the black and white racket, which may or may not be different, set up differently from the Black Beauty. But he was using the Tuxedo for a limited time period. It was Stuttgart, Halle, Wimbledon, and Cincinnati. And now he may or may not bring it out for competition play at the U.S. Open, but he was using the Black Beauty. That is the fully black one in practice the other day, which is it's the one that he used at the Australian Open this year. It's the one that he used at Rotterdam this year. It's the one that he used at Indian Wells. So maybe after that traumatic experience with Djokovic, he wants to try a little something new and just kind of go back to that other racket. Maybe it just feels better in his hands, or possibly he just wants to warm up. He might just be practicing with it. And the most likely conclusion is that there's actually no substantial difference whatsoever between the Tuxedo and the Black Beauty. That's enough. I'm not going to talk about the racket anymore unless one of you guys wants to. Eric says, hope he brings back the black back. It hasn't looked right with the Tuxedo. Okay, Hey, man, that's fine. I hear you. I kind of like the Black Beauty too. It's got a certain simplicity to it, um, which I can respect. But let me know if you have any other questions about this draw. Again, I think the basic upshot here, folks, is that Nadal, I wouldn't call it a cakewalk. Kyle Edmund is capable of applying pressure to Rafael Nadal. Again, the slower courts at the U.S. Open should benefit Nadal to some degree. Again, they're not as close as not as slow as Indian Wells, but I do think that they are fairly slow as compared to, say, the Australian Open, compared to, say, Cincinnati, compared to, say, I think even the Rogers Cup. They're pretty slow. That will help Nadal in terms of setting up his shots. And you could get some high bounces where you can give some of the single-handers some problems. That won't be a problem with Edmund, however. But, yeah, Nadal is, I think, looking to be a favorite to be at least in the final. He's my favorite to win the tournament, just based on his form, based on the rest he's had, based on the consistency he's displayed. And I think Djokovic is a close second. But the upshot with this draw is that Rafa has a nice course, a nice clean course in. There shouldn't be too many insurmountable obstacles. In fact, no insurmountable obstacles. But Anderson could be an issue in the quarterfinals. Delpo could be somewhat of an issue, or possibly even Wawrinka in the semifinals. And in terms of, kind of dark horses, new guys that could do well, I mean, listen, just lost badly to Johnson in Winston-Salem. Interesting. I have to get that readout going. I need to look at the scores here. Winston-Salem tennis. Yes, Edmund out. That's true. And Chung just lost the first set to Busta. So that's looking interesting. I have to kind of modify this. Let me go get the draw while I'm thinking about Winston-Salem. Let me get that draw. But just to finish that thought on the U.S. Open, by contrast, Federer has, I think, a very competitive draw and a very competitive course through this tournament. To repeat, Roger Federer may have to deal with the bearded racket smasher. I'll stop calling him a racket smasher, but he is the bearded one. The ultimate bearded one, Benoit Paire. And that could be a fairly competitive match right there in the second round for Federer. Then in the third round, Nick Kyrgios. Roger Federer's got to deal with Nick Kyrgios in his third match of the tournament, folks. I'm not sure there's any other top seed that can lay claim to such a competitive match that early in the tournament. So Federer's got his work cut out for him, folks. Now, the good news, the saving grace for Federer with respect to Kyrgios is that Kyrgios, as far as I know, has never been beyond, I think, the third round at the U.S. Open. So, assuming Roger can get through Kyrgios, and he's going to need to deal with Chung, people are talking, giving me some... I'm not doing Benoit anymore, LSB. I'm doing Benoit. Benoit. Not Benoit. It's Benoit. That's the compromise that I'm trying to do. What do you think of that one? Let me know. So then after the potentially devastating third round match with Kyrgios, he might have to deal with either Fognini or Chung in the fourth round, which is not a big deal given Chung's recent form. But the quarterfinal for Federer, again, for those of you just tuning in, we're talking about the U.S. Open draw. It was released today. I'm talking about Roger Federer's course through this tournament, I have concluded that he is not a top favorite in the tournament. I don't think a lot of people are expecting him to win, but it's possible. He's got his work cut out for him. And in terms of showing the world that he is, I don't know, the number 2 player in the world or the number 1 player in the world, in terms of demonstrating that he is the best player on the circuit, or maybe even the greatest player of all time in terms of kind of his legacy, this tournament is good because what's teed up is a quarterfinal with Djokovic, and we want Federer to. The Federer fans should want Federer to face Djokovic because he needs to deal with Djokovic. He's got unfinished business with Djokovic. That's the truth. And so he needs to deal with Djokovic. I'm glad they have a potential match in the quarterfinals. Now, if Djokovic beats him again, that's going to be hard for the Fed fans. It's going to be joyous for the Djokovic fans, but it's going to be hard for the Fed fans. I do think Federer is capable of pushing through Djokovic. I do think Federer then is capable possibly of pushing through either Cilic or maybe Goffin in the semifinal. And of course, once Roger's into the final, I mean, let's step back for a second, because you know what? If Federer can win that quarterfinal, if he gets into that semifinal, things are looking good for him. In a way, and if he can land a spot in the semifinal, having beaten Djokovic in the quarterfinal, I might have to change my calculus. I mean, depending on sort of how he's negotiated his way and how he's been playing, and assuming that Djokovic didn't, totally break down, assuming Djokovic was playing sort of respectably, Federer could easily, he could change the calculus and Federer could start to look like the favorite, to be honest. I mean, he's certainly capable of plowing through Cilic, or maybe it would be Goffin. That would be a beautiful semifinal to watch, Federer versus Goffin. But then once he gets to Nadal, wow. I mean, the last 5 meetings, he's whooped Nadal's butt, excuse my French, and sort of the wins have become increasingly more decisive during the course of those 5 matches, those last 5 matches that they played. So, man, if Federer can get into the final, that would be a dream for so many tennis fans, to have a Federer versus Nadal final in the U.S. Open. Of course, that's never happened. That's the one final, I believe, they've never played in terms of the Grand Slams. And, man, that would be just fantastic. That would be joyous. I would be a happy man to be watching that. And to be honest, if Federer's in the final against Nadal, I think Federer wins, if Federer can get that far. But he's not my pick. He's not my pick based on the sort of rational calculus, folks. I can't. All right, Robert Ferguson says, Federer gets through Djokovic by doing 2 things. 1, dramatically reducing unforced errors. Yes. 2, start hitting through the backhands again. Yeah, kind of, the backhand, we saw at the 2017, excuse me if you got a little blip there. Yeah, I mean, listen, he absolutely needs to reduce the unforced errors, and that's just, they come in a couple of forms. It's, the netted shots. Oh, man, that's so frustrating when you just can't get stuff over the net. He was doing that a lot at Halle, I remember. One of the things that Djokovic does, and Coric has given Federer a hard time, and I got a comment about this the other day, and I think it's a legitimate comment. It's one of the reasons why Djokovic can get under Federer's skin. What he does is he hits to Federer's body, and more specifically, he hits to Federer's feet. There is one pretty much fail-safe way to again, get under Federer's skin. Really, probably get under anybody's skin if you can do it. It's nice work if you can get it. It's not easy to do, and that's why, again, Djokovic deserves a lot of credit for doing this pretty consistently. As I'm thinking about it, he's doing it pretty consistently on Sunday as well, but hitting to Federer's feet, and that, of course, was what was happening. Federer was landing some pretty respectable serves, and then Djokovic puts it right back at Federer's toes at the baseline. Now, you can't really get a good piece of a shot that's landing at your toes, folks. Now, you might say that Federer's footwork is the remedy to that problem, and I think that's totally right. And that's one of the things that Federer said after the match at Cincinnati. He said, I think it was his footwork. He kind of boiled it down to his footwork. He just couldn't get into position. And Djokovic didn't make it very easy on Federer in that respect. It was quite hard to get into the proper position. So, with the balls coming at his feet and whatnot, and they were coming at pretty much lightning speed. But hitting the balls to Federer's feet is a very, very effective tactic, particularly. Now, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can hit it to his feet at the baseline. That gives Federer problems in particular because Federer has that forward play. He likes to kind of to angle forward in his point construction. So he's always kind of pushing up on the baseline a little bit, which means that those shots that are coming right at the baseline, right at his feet, are very hard to retrieve, very hard to get a good piece of, certainly hard to dictate play when Djokovic is landing balls right at his feet. But the other way to do it with Federer, which is interesting, is that you hit to Federer's feet as he's approaching, because, eventually with that forward dynamic, Fed will usually approach, and as he's approaching, if you get a good piece of his approach shot, it really depends on the quality of Federer's approach. But Djokovic a couple times I've seen. Coric did it a few times at Halle. You hit to his feet right there when he's kind of approaching, or he's kind of at mid-court in the midst of an approach, and Federer has a hard time kind of picking those. Sometimes it has to be a half volley. Sometimes he has to kind of pick them out of there, and it gives him some problems. So, again, it's not... Yeah, the returns, saying Robert, returns came mostly to the feet. To the feet came mostly on the second serves. Yeah, that's right. Djokovic was just punishing the second serve, and the numbers on that were very impressive. Remember, Djokovic was winning over half of the points on Federer. The great Federer, the unbreakable Federer serve in Cincinnati. Djokovic winning over half of those points. So those are very effective methods, and again, they're not easy to execute. I think that's the most important point. So it kind of goes back to giving credit to Djokovic in a way. There was a lot of pushing going on, but some of that push. I mean, what I like, how I characterized it in a comment the other day was deep pushing. That's Djokovic. That was Djokovic on Sunday. Push and depth. Those were the two big components. Well, part of the depth component that has a little nuance is that he tends to go to Federer's body, just hit it right to Federer's body, right to his feet in particular. And man, that can give Roger a hard time, particularly on days when his feet aren't moving so well. Robert Ferguson says Djokovic backhander down the forehand line wasn't working all that great. Okay. I agree with you, Aaron. We'll add something. Djokovic was breakable on his serve. Djokovic was beatable in this match. Yes. Well, what I said on Twitter, and it was midway through the match on Sunday, and it was very clear Djokovic was going to win, and you can see it documented. I said I would be surprised if Roger did not break Djokovic at least once, because Djokovic was getting broken all week. Djokovic was broken in every match that he played in Cincinnati. Maybe there was one. I think there was one match where he was able to hold his serve, but he was getting broken in pretty much every match. So in that respect, I wasn't surprised. I was expecting Federer to break him, which Federer did. And as I said yesterday, one of the most, really the only impressive stat that Federer has from the Sunday match was his 100% conversion rate. He had one break point and he converted it. Oh, yes. Let's see. What do we have? Some questions here. There was one going up here. Roger's relationship to Ljubicic. Virginia asks about that. Well, they were out on the practice court. My understanding, my operatives on Twitter, and I think I saw a little clip of this. I'm not sure if I actually saw Ljubicic with my own two eyes. LSB confirmed this. Federer was out on the practice court with Ljubicic the other day. Correct? I think he was. But in terms of the relationship, I don't know. There is that possible conflict of interest that the Coric representation raises, right? Ljubicic is a manager. He's not the coach of Coric, but like the business manager or something. Of course, they're countrymen. They're both, are they Croats? I think they're Croats. And yes, I don't know of anything. I have no firm evidence that there's anything that's gone south between Federer and Ljubicic. I do know, and please tell me if I'm wrong, I watched every Federer match for sure. I didn't see any clips of Ljubicic in the audience. I saw Mirka. I think Mirka was there like right from the get-go in Cincinnati. She's like being real supportive. But I do think that he was absent in Cincinnati for whatever reason. But I don't think that necessarily indicates there's something sour with the relationship at all. But there is that little Coric conflict of interest, I posted something to Twitter on the day of the Halle final. On the day of the Halle final, it was Federer versus Coric, and I posted a little picture on Twitter of Ivan Ljubicic with the caption, "It's a win-win." He had a win-win scenario that day in the final at Halle, so I don't think that's presenting too many problems necessarily, the Coric representation, but you never know. I mean, listen, these guys, they change coaches. There's no hard feelings necessarily. Sometimes they just need to kind of just recalibrate, retool. They need to change. Federer has changed coaches at various points in his career. Right at the beginning of his career, in fact, he changed coaches right after he won Wimbledon for the first time. He changed coaches after that, which people thought was a little strange, but he just needed change. And then, of course, he went on and cleaned up. I mean, that was it. Once he won Wimbledon in 2003, it was all over. It was high time for Roger Federer. Federer fever. After that, the real sweet spot, that 2006 season, keep going back to that. You look at the best tennis seasons. You got Djokovic in 2015, Federer in 2006. And I think most of the detailed analysis of that concludes that Federer has an edge over Djokovic by just a bit in 2006 and therefore holds the best tennis season ever recorded. What are the thoughts on Lendl joining Zverev's team? Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds positive. You're talking about Zverev in terms of the advantage the young man has, the upside for this young man. Yeah, he's been the world number 3 or 4 for a couple of years now. I mean, listen, Zverev is someone who could impress. Who could impress at the U.S. Open. He really could. I mean, he's just struggled in this best-of-5 format. But as I was saying yesterday, and as is very clear for those of you who follow Alexander Zverev, he is getting a lot more practice with those five-setters. Roland Garros gave him quite a bit of practice in the five-set department. So he's getting a little better. What if Fed loses to Kyrgios? I know. I mean, that, again, I don't see another one of the big players having that much of a challenge as early as the third round. Now, I guess I could take that back because you do have a first-round match between Wawrinka and Dimitrov. I was saying this the other day. Now, a lot of you know that I'm partial to the one-handed backhand. And what I don't like is when they pit the one-handers. There's so few one-handers. There's less than 20% of the players on the tour. About 20 of the players in the top 100 hit with one-handers. And I just often find that they're pitting one-handers against each other early in the tournament. That doesn't have, they don't take into account whether you hit with a two-fister or a one-hander in putting these draws together. So it's all about the rankings. But here again, you've got Stan versus Dimitrov in the first round, which, two solid one-handers, and by definition, only one of them will get through to the second round. I wish they could have spaced them out a little more so we could have more one-handers deeper in the rounds. We'll see. I mean, the potential one-handers we could see, for those of you who are interested, potential one-handers we could see in the quarterfinals would be Thiem, and then you might have Shapovalov. I mean, if he just absolutely amazes. You've got Tsitsipas in there. You've got Dimitrov, Wawrinka. But down in the bottom half, there's not much selection in terms. It's really just Federer in terms of people that are hitting with one-handers that could be going deep. There's really no one-handers in the bottom half. So Federer will have to be doing battle, as he's done so often for most of his career, have to do battle against the two-fisters. For those of you tuning in, we are discussing the U.S. Open draw. My conclusion is that Rafael Nadal has a fairly clean ride, not a walk in the park. He could have problems, but his biggest problem, by the round of 16 might be Kyle Edmund, and Kyle Edmund is not that much of a problem. One of you just noted that Steve Johnson just put out Edmund in straight sets at Winston-Salem. And then, Anderson possibly in the quarterfinal for Nadal, possibly Thiem in the quarterfinal. Again, not a big problem for Rafa. Biggest issue he could have in the semifinals would be Delpo. Possibly, if one of the upstarts is doing well, you could see a Coric or a Tsitsipas. I would love to see that. Coric is another one. He's kind of a baby Djokovic. In the same way that Dimitrov is baby fed, I really see Coric as baby Djokovic. And he has been able to beat Federer he beats Federer for exactly the same reasons that Djokovic beats Federer. Hits to the body, constantly landing shots to Roger's toes, particularly when Roger's approaching, and it's just devastating to Roger. So, but it's all about the footwork. He needs to get out of the way. He needs to move those feet and do it. In the bottom half of the draw, for those of you, again, I'm kind of repeating myself. Outside of Federer, one viewer is saying, I will root for Shapovalov and Tsitsipas. Yeah, me too. I mean, we'll have to see where Tsitsipas ends up. But again, he could see he's going to have to deal possibly with Borna Coric. Now, Coric, depending on how he's feeling, can be a threat or may not be a threat. Again, he's not a completely dependable player. He's impressed at various points in his career, particularly as against Roger Federer. Coric is another one of those guys. He kind of knows how to. Even at Indian Wells, I think Coric was giving Roger a hard time. As the announcer at that point said, suffocating Roger with depth. Depth depth, which is, I think most of the players are aiming to land their ground strokes deeply or with sufficient depth. It's always a goal. I think that's kind of a standing goal they have. Depends on the situation. It depends on where they are in the point. Sometimes, obviously, depth has no place in a point. There are other shots to make that are better winners to make. But in general, when people are hanging around the baseline going back and forth, deep shots are preferable. Coric does that well. Coric can hit very deeply. And again, right to Federer's feet. That's what I've been seeing. That's my empirical evidence, Djokovic and Coric, landing shots at Federer's toes very effectively and mixing Federer up because he just can't get a piece of these shots. And he apparently in Cincinnati just couldn't move his feet. That's what he said in the post-match interview. He said he was having a hard time with his footwork. So, down in the bottom half, on the other hand, we've got Federer. I think Nadal's got arguably one of the easiest. I'm going to close this curtain. Hold on. Federer's got a difficult draw. What can I say? That's the truth. Federer's got a more difficult. He's got to deal with Nick Kyrgios. He's got to deal with the thunderous Australian Nick Kyrgios. The bratty Australian Nick Kyrgios in the third round. And then Djokovic in the quarterfinals. Well, at this point, if I were to predict, I guess the smart money would be on Roger Federer having a quarterfinal run at the U.S. Open, just like he did last year. We just have to kind of watch, kind of hang out and wait for Shanghai or whatnot, wait for Basel, the tour finals. But, after this, it's over. But I guess the smart money, he could catch fire. That's right. If he kind of, he kind of finds his rhythm, as I'm pronouncing it like Roger, he finds his rhythm against Kyrgios. Yeah, he could just kind of find form and start plowing through. He has an axe to grind with Djokovic. And the Djokovic match is coming for Federer, for those of you just tuning in the quarterfinal. Djokovic will be probably having to deal with Federer again in the quarterfinal, a rematch from the final at Cincinnati. Federer will have, if he can get through Kyrgios, if he can get through the bearded madman Benoit Paire, if he can get through the South Korean Wonder Boy. Well, I was calling him a Wonder Boy back in January. I'm not sure that applies now. If he can get through Chung, possibly it'd be Fognini. I think he can probably do that. It'll be Djokovic. It'll be a rematch. The pressure will be off. Again, for those of you just tuning in, the pressure will be off, relatively speaking. And Federer will have his work cut out for him, folks. He's capable of beating Djokovic on the hards. The slower courts probably redound to Novak's benefit a little more here, but it's entirely possible that Roger could plow through Djokovic. And if he comes through Kyrgios, he comes through Chung or Fognini, and he comes through Djokovic, and he's into the semifinal, well, then I think he becomes much more of a favorite to win the tournament. Because he can deal with Nadal. Remember, the last 5 times they've met, Federer has sent the great Rafa Nadal packing in pretty decisive fashion. It's been very decisive in these last few matches against Nadal. So, and they've all been on hard courts. So, yeah, I would be inclined to conclude. If Federer can get through the quarterfinal, I would be inclined to conclude that he becomes the favorite in the U.S. Open, because that will show a lot. If he can get through into the semifinals, it'll mean he went through Djokovic most likely. Now, Djokovic could strike out early in the tournament. If Federer is into the semifinal without having to deal with Djokovic, I would be reticent to conclude that he's a favorite for the tournament, because it just wouldn't necessarily show so much about his play. I want to go to a comment here. I'd be stunned if Federer beats Djokovic at the U.S. Open. However, I could see a strong finish with Federer parlaying basal victory to winning the tour final. That I see is much more realistic. Okay. Yeah, well, that is, kind of find some rhythm, find some more form, maybe give Djokovic a little more of a hard time, a little closer of a match. I mean, I think it would be fine. It would be better for Roger to come. I mean, even if he lost a semifinal the quarterfinal to Djokovic, if he played well and could feel good about himself, let's say, they just went to tiebreakers, one of those matches that kind of rested on 1 or 2 points here and there. If he played well and felt good about himself, felt good about the way he played, and in the post-match he says, yeah, I was playing pretty well today. It came down to a couple points and Djokovic was able to get me. That would be a better position to be in. What we don't want is another Cincinnati when Federer comes out and he's just not himself. He just plays really lackluster tennis, which is not saying, folks, that Djokovic didn't apply pressure to Federer. I'm not sure if we have some Djokovic fans in the audience right now, but I'm not saying Djokovic doesn't deserve credit. Djokovic was applying pressure. I just went through a 15 minutes of discussion, and you probably heard me, talking about how effective Djokovic is placing shots to Roger's feet with the depth in the ground strokes that kind of suffocates Federer. And if Federer's feet, if he's not feeling particularly sort of fleet-footed on a given day, which was the case on Sunday, it can really trip him up. Literally. Sometimes he just trips, but he certainly can't get a piece of those balls particularly. Now, one person mentioned, be interested in your views on this, one potential remedy for Federer would be to play further behind the baseline. I had one viewer say that, one of the problems on Sunday is that Federer, again, was kind of edging up on the baseline a lot and even into the court a little bit, because that's how he plays. He likes to play with forward momentum. Well, with Djokovic and with Coric, even Nadal, sometimes they can use that forward momentum against him because they place these shots at his feet. He's hugging the baseline. He's kind of rushing up. He's pushing up on the baseline and pushing into the court, in fact. I mean, usually the point construction has that forward momentum with Federer where he's going to end up at the net eventually. But in the process of getting to the net, folks like Djokovic and Coric can trip Federer up by literally going to his feet. That's what I've been seeing. So all I ask of Federer, all I hope, is that he plays a good match. If Djokovic might beat him fair and square, Djokovic beat him fair and square on Sunday, but I hope that Federer in this potential quarterfinal, for those of you tuning in this potential quarterfinal between Federer and Djokovic, I just hope that Federer requires more of Djokovic. I hope he requires that Djokovic go into that kind of beast mode that I saw him go into against Raonic after he surrendered his serve, after Raonic broke him. He smashed his racket and he went into beast mode and he broke back and took the set. I want to see Federer put Djokovic into beast mode. I think Djokovic should have to go into beast mode to win Grand Slams. And if he can't do it, well, maybe he shouldn't win the Grand Slam. All right, culture and sport, you got to get going. I'm probably going to wrap it up for now, too. Any other questions on this draw? I think I've been over it a couple of times. Again, the upshot is Nadal's looking at a pretty clean route into this final, folks. Unless Anderson or possibly Delpo can do something about it. But he looks like he's got a clean path into the final. Alternatively, Roger Federer looks like he's got a real challenge on his hands. Really has a challenge. But as I said before, and I'll conclude with this, for the Fed fans, yeah, I'll do my best to stream the tournament every day, Patrick. I'll try to do that. But now I've lost my thought. As I said before, and I'll close with this, we want Federer. You know all these weak era folks. You know the people who argue on the weak era kind of approach. You know this argument. I did a whole video about it, trying to understand the people who believe that Federer is who he is because he hasn't had the competition. It was a weak era when he had his real dominant era. That's the basic argument. But that's extended into the present day. There's always the weak era folks. And the weak era folks were able to in the Sunday match, they were able to get some more fodder for their arguments, as I've put it before. They have an argument because they can argue now that Djokovic has taken care of Federer pretty decisively. They hadn't met in 2 or 3 years. Now, of course, they can argue. Federer did so well in 2017 in part because Djokovic wasn't around. And so the Federer fans want Federer to have a difficult climb, a difficult draw. We want him to face Djokovic. We don't want him squirming out of a potential match with Djokovic. We don't want him narrowly avoiding Djokovic by virtue of, how the draw was put together. No. We want him to face Djokovic because he wants to face Djokovic. He doesn't want to avoid Djokovic. He wants to look at Djokovic head on and play another match and show Djokovic what he's made of. So I'm glad that Roger has a difficult draw. With respect to some of the dark horses, and this is what I'll just conclude on, Coric and Tsitsipas. Tsitsipas it looks like he's pretty clean into the fourth round, folks, for those of you kind of following Tsitsipas. Looks like he's cleanly into the fourth round, unless Coric can stop him. But then Tsitsipas might have to deal with Delpo. Then, of course, he might have to deal with Wawrinka or possibly Raonic, possibly Isner. He'll have his work cut out for him, and before he gets into the final, Tsitsipas, he'll have to deal with quite possibly Nadal in the semifinal. So those are my thoughts on this draw. It's going to be a fantastic tournament. I'm really looking forward to it. Looking forward to, among other things, Roger coming out. But I'm looking forward to seeing Rafa again, to be honest. For those of you who missed my last live stream, I wanted to emphasize again that I really warmed up to Rafa during Wimbledon because he adjusted his game. He, again, through the force of will, he was able to lift himself out of that Wimbledon slump. And that was a hell of a Wimbledon slump. Man, that was 5 years. Just nothing, no results. He was able to lift himself out of that Wimbledon slump and play a great tournament. So, really interested and excited to see him. Thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate it. Thanks, Patrick. We're going to be doing more live streaming in the days and weeks to come. Yeah, let's talk about this. Let's get into this. This is going to be it's the last Grand Slam of the year. Let's make it the best. May the best man win. May the best man win, and we have some devastating players. We'll see what Andy Murray can do, but even without Andy Murray, we have players who are, to me, inspiring players, some of the best in history, certainly, arguably, the best in history. You could argue that we've got arguably the top three greatest players in history in Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer. Well, I have a video about Rod Laver. Thanks for my fancy, it's a fancy mic. At least it's working. The other day it was just belching out all these strange noises on the live stream. I hope this one is coming out a little better. So it's going to be an inspiring tournament. It's going to be great tennis, without question. I like where Roger Federer, I like the space that I feel like Roger Federer is in right now. I like the space that Novak Djokovic is in right now, in ascendance in a way. I like the space that Nadal's in. And you got Tsitisipas, you have a couple of these upstarts, and then you have the people that could pull a few surprises. Delpo's capable of winning this tournament. So, yeah, I could do that. I'm going to check into doing that, but I won't be able to actually show the broadcast. Yeah, they'll file a copyright strike if I actually show the broadcast. But what I've usually been doing, my live stream yesterday, I had Winston-Salem going. I actually didn't turn the TV on today, but my plan is for live streams, if there's a match happening, that I'll have it going. Well, Winston-Salem is going right now. Chung out. Carreño Busta takes out Chung in straight sets, 6-3, 6-4. So, based on that performance, looks more like Federer probably will be dealing with Fognini rather than Chung in the fourth round. Carreño Busta was winning 60% of the points. 55% of the points on Chung's second serve. So, doing quite a job. Carreño Busta broke Chung 4 times during the course of the match. Chung broke Busta once. And then Edmund is out. He falls to Steve Johnson. So I guess in conclusion, I can just say a little bit about that. It looks like we'll have, we're in the semifinals of Winston-Salem, we're going to have Johnson versus Busta in one semifinal, and we don't know who's going to be in the other semifinal. But Taro Daniel is looking to be pretty much on fire. He took care of Sam Querrey. Remember, Taro Daniel's the guy who beat Djokovic in Indian Wells. Well, he might be in that final, but I would say probably Busta as one party in that final, maybe a Busta versus Taro Daniel. Kind of small fry stuff over in the 250 tournaments, but I thought I'd mention it. Well, I hope everyone is doing wonderfully. Thank you for tuning in. Robert, you're a subscriber, but you didn't get notifications for the live stream. Well, I'll look into that. I will look into that. You should get those notifications. It should come up if you're on YouTube and I go on live. It should come up. But I'll check into that to make sure that the live streams are being displayed. I think I'll have to look in my phone and some of the advanced options. I'm recording this on the phone, so awesome. Thanks for joining us, Patrick, and thanks everybody for joining us. This was a good conversation. Looking forward to the next live stream. Have a great one. Good night.